In addition, listening to Google may open up new avenues for exploring the past. In my book, Equations from God, I argued that mathematics was generally considered a divine language in 1800, but that over the 19th century it was secularized. Part of my evidence came from mathematical treatises, which often contained divine language in the early 19th century, but lost that language toward the end of the century. And by necessity, doing my research in the pre-Google Books world, I had to pick and choose. My textual evidence had to be limited. I could only read a certain number of these mathematical works. And so, and I'm sure this sounds familiar, I chose to focus on the writings of some high-profile mathematicians. The vastness of Google Books for the first time presents me and others the opportunity to do a more comprehensive scan. For me, of Victorian mathematical writing, for evidence of religious language. This holds true, these new modes of research, for all of us. So Google has provided us not only with free research riches, but also with a helpful direct challenge to our research methodology, for which we should be grateful. Is Google good for history? Of course it is. But does that mean that we cannot provide constructive criticism of Google to make it the best that it can be, especially for historians? Of course not. I'd like to focus on one serious issue that I feel ripples through many parts of Google Books. For a company that is a champion of openness, Google remains strangely closed when it comes to Google Books. Google Books seems to operate in ways that are very different from other Google properties, where Google aims to give it all away. For instance, I still cannot understand why Google doesn't make it easier for historians such as myself who want to do technical analyses of historical books to download them en masse more easily. If it wanted to, Google could make a portal tomorrow to allow people to download all public domain books. Now, I've heard the excuses from Googlers. We spent millions to digitize this stuff. We're not going to just give it away. And yet Google has also spent a similar amount, hundreds of millions of dollars, on Android and Wave and other software projects, and Chrome OS and the Chrome browser, and guess what? They're giving those away. Google's hesitance with regard to its books project shows that openness only goes so far at Google. Now, I suppose we should understand that. Google is a company. It's not a public library. But that's not the philanthropic aura they cast around Google Books at its inception, or even today in dramatic op-eds touting the social benefit of Google Books. In short, complaining about the quality of Google scans, I feel, distracts us from the larger problem of Google Books. The real problem, especially for those in the digital humanities, but increasingly for all others, is that Google Books is only open in the read a book in my pajamas way. To be sure, you can download PDFs of many public domain books, but they make it difficult to download the OCR text from multiple public domain books, which is what you need for more sophisticated historical research. And when we move beyond the public domain, Google has pushed for a troubling restrictive regime for millions of so-called orphan works. I'd like to see a settlement that offers greater, not lesser, access to these works, in addition to greater availability for what Cliff Lynch has called computational access to Google Books. A higher level of access that is less about reading a particular page, image on your computer, than applying digital tools to many pages or books at one time to create new knowledge and understanding. This is partially promised, I should say, in the Google Books settlement, in the form of text mining research centers. Just 2 of them. But those centers will be behind a velvet rope, and I suspect that the casual historian, which includes most of us, will be unlikely to ever use these centers. Google has elaborate APIs for application programming interfaces for most of its services, yet it provides only the most superficial access to Google Books. For a company that thrives on openness and the empowerment of users and software developers, Google Books is thus to me a bit of a puzzle now. With much fanfare, Google has recently launched, evidently out of internal agitation, what it calls a data liberation front to ensure portability of data and openness throughout the company. On dataliberation.org, the website for this front, which I encourage you to visit, these Googlers list 25 Google projects and how to maximize their portability and openness. These are virtually all the main services at Google. Sadly, Google Books is nowhere to be seen on this site, even though it also includes user-created data such as Google Books My Library feature, not to mention all of the data, that is, books, that we have paid for with our tax dollars and tuition. So while the Che Guevaras put up their revolutionary fist on one side of the Googleplex, on the other side, colleagues with a circumscribed group of authors and publishers placed messy restrictions onto large swaths of our cultural heritage through a settlement that few in the Academy support. John Irwan and Dan Clancy and Brandon Badger have done an admirable job explaining much of the internal process of Google Books, and I applaud them for that. It's much better than the engineers and product managers at places like Microsoft or IBM. But still, the project feels removed and alien in a way that other Google projects are not. Now that is partly because they're lawyered up and thus hamstrung from responding to some questions academics have, or from instituting more liberal policies and features. The same chutzpah that would lead a company to digitize entire libraries also led it to go too far within copyright books, leading to a breakdown with authors and publishers in the flawed settlement we have in front of us today. We should remember that the reason we're at a settlement now is that Google didn't have enough chutzpah to take the higher, tougher route, a direct challenge in the courts, the court of public opinion, or Congress to the intellectual property regime that governs many books and makes them difficult to bring online, even though their authors and publishers are long gone. While Google regularly uses its power to alter markets radically, it has been uncharacteristically weak in attacking head-on this intellectual property tower and its powerful corporate defenders. Had Google taken a stronger stance, historians would likely have been fully behind their efforts, since we too face the annoyances that unbalanced copyright law places on our pedagogical and scholarly use of textual, visual, audio, and video evidence. I would much rather have historians and Google work together. While Google, as a research tool, challenges our traditional historical methods, historians very well may have the ability to challenge and make better what Google does. Historical and humanistic questions are often at the high end of complexity among engineering challenges Google faces, similar to and even beyond, for instance, machine translation. And Google's engineers might learn a great deal from our scholarly practice. Google's algorithms have been optimized over the last decade to search through the hyperlinked documents of the web. But those same algorithms falter when faced with the odd challenges of change over centuries and the alienness of the past and old books and documents that historians examine daily. Because Google Books is the product of engineers with tremendous talent in computer science, but less sense of the history of the book, where the book as an object rather than bits, it founders in many respects. Google still has no decent sense of how to rank search results in humanities corpora. Bibliometrics and text mining work poorly on these sources, as opposed to, say, the highly structured scientific papers Google Scholars specializes. Studying how professional historians rank and sort primary and secondary sources might tell Google a lot, which it could use in turn to help scholars. So ultimately, the interesting question for me is not, is Google good for history? It might be, is history good for Google? And to both questions, my answer is yes.